The tremendous role which the opposites and their union play in alchemy helps us to understand why the alchemists were so fond of paradoxes. In order to attain this union, they tried not only to visualize the opposites together, but to express them in the same breath. Characteristically, the paradoxes cluster most thickly round the arcane substance, which was believed to contain the opposites in uncombined form as the prima materia, and to amalgamate them as the lapis philosophorum. Thus the lapis is called on the one hand base, cheap, immature, volatile, and on the other hand precious, perfect and solid, or the prima materia is base and noble, or precious, and parvi momenti, of little moment. The materia is visible to all eyes. The whole world sees it, touches it, loves it, and yet no one knows it. This stone therefore is no stone, says the Turba. That thing is cheap and costly, dark, hidden, and known to everyone, having one name and many names. The stone is thousand-named like the gods of the mystery religions. The arcane substance is one and all. In the treatise of Comarios, where the philosopher Comarios teaches the philosophy to Cleopatra, it is said, he showed with his hand the unity of the whole. Pelagius asks, why speak ye of the manifold matter? The substance of natural things is one, and of one nature that which conquers all. Further paradoxes, I am the black of the white, and the red of the white, and the yellow of the red. Or the principle of the art is the raven, who flies without wings in the blackness of night and in the brightness of day. The stone is cold and moist in its manifest part, and in its hidden part is hot and dry. In lead is the dead life, or burn in water and wash in fire. The Allegoria Sapientum speak of two figures, one of which is white and lacking a shadow, the other red and lacking the redness. A quotation from Socrates runs, "Seek the coldness of the moon and ye shall find the heat of the sun." The opus is said to be a running without running, moving without motion. Make mercury with mercury. The philosophical tree has its roots in the air. This is probably a reference to the tree of the Sephiroth. That paradox and ambivalence are the keynotes of the whole work, is shown by the chemical wedding. Over the main portal of the castle, two words are written, Congratula Condoleo. The paradoxical qualities of Mercurius have already been discussed in a separate study. As Mercurius is the principal name for the arcane substance, he deserves mention here as the paradox par excellence. What is said of him is obviously true of the lapis, which is merely another synonym for the thousand-named arcane substance. As the Tractatus Aureus de Lapide says, our matter has as many names as there are things in the world. The arcane substance is also synonymous with the monad and the son of man mentioned in Hippolytus. Monoimos thinks that there is some such man of whom the poet speaks as Oceanus, when he says Oceanus, origin of gods and origin of men. Putting this into other words, he says that the man is all, the source of the universe, unbegotten, incorruptible, everlasting, and that there is a son of the aforesaid man who is begotten and capable of suffering, and whose birth is outside time, neither willed nor predetermined. This man is a single monad, uncompounded and indivisible, yet compounded and divisible, loving and at peace with all things, yet warring with all things, and at war with itself in all things, unlike and like itself, as it were a musical harmony containing all things, showing forth all things and giving birth to all things. It is its own mother, its own father, the two immortal names. The emblem of the whole man, says Monoimos, is the jot or tittle. This one tittle is the uncompounded, simple, unmixed monad, having its composition from nothing whatsoever, yet composed of many forms, of many parts. That single undivided jot is the many-faced, thousand-eyed and thousand-named jot of the iota. This is the emblem of that perfect and invisible man. The son of the man is the one iota, the one jot flowing from on high, full and filling all things, containing in himself everything that is in the man, the father of the son of the man. The alchemists seem to have visualized their lapis or prima materia in a similar manner. At any rate, they were able to cap the paradoxes of Monoimos. Thus they said of Mercurius, this spirit is generated from the substances of the sea, and calls himself moist, dry and fiery, in close agreement with the invocation to Hermes in the magic papyrus entitled The Secret Inscription, where Hermes is addressed as a damp, fiery, cold spirit. The mystery of the smallest written sign, the point, is also known to alchemy. The point is the symbol of a mysterious creative center in nature. The author of the Novum Lumen admonishes his reader. But you, dear reader, you will have above all to consider the point in nature. And you need nothing else, but take care lest you seek that point in the vulgar metals, where it is not. For these metals, the common gold more especially, are dead. But our metals are alive, they have a spirit, and they are the ones you must take. For know that fire is the life of the metals. The point is identical with the prima materia of the metals, which is a fatty water, aqua pinguis, the latter being a product of the moist and the hot. John Dee, 1527-1607, speculates as follows. It is not unreasonable to suppose that by the 4 straight lines which run in opposite directions from a single individual point, the mystery of the 4 elements is indicated. According to him, the quaternity consists of 4 straight lines meeting in a right angle. Things and beings have their first origin in the point and the monad. The center of nature is the point originated by God, the sun point in the egg. This, a commentary on the Turba says, is the germ of the egg in the yolk. Out of this little point, says Dawn in his Physica Genesis, the wisdom of God made with the creative word the huge machine of the world. The Concilium Coniunctionis remarks that the point is the chick, Pullus. Milius adds that this is the bird of Hermes, or the spirit Mercurius. The same author places the soul in the midpoint of the heart together with the spirit, which he compares with the angel who was infused with the soul at this point, in the womb. Paracelsus says that the anima Iliastri dwells in the fire in the heart. It is incapable of suffering, whereas the anima Cagastris is capable of suffering and is located in the water of the pericardium. Just as earth corresponds to the triangle and water to the line, so fire corresponds to the point. Democritus stresses that fire consists of fiery globules. Light too has this round form, hence the designation sun point. This point is on the one hand the world's center, the salt point in the midst of the great fabric of the whole world, as Kunrath calls it. Salt equals sign sapientia. Yet it is not only the bond, but also the destroyer of all destructible things. Hence, this world egg is the ancient Saturn, the most secret lead of the sages, and the ambisexual philosophic man of the philosophers, the Catholic androgen of the sophists, the rebus, etc. The most perfect form is round, because it is modelled on the point. The sun is round, and so is fire, since it is composed of the fiery globules of Democritus. God fashioned the sphere of light round himself. God is an intelligible sphere whose centre is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. The point symbolizes light and fire, also the Godhead, insofar as light is an image of God or an exemplar of the deity. This spherical light modelled on the point is also the shining or illuminating body that dwells in the heart of man. The light of nature is the radical moisture, humidum radical, which, as balsam, works from the heart. Like the sun in the macrocosm, and we must conclude, like God in the supra-celestial world. Thus does Stebe describe the second God in man. The same author derives the gold from the dew, or supra-celestial balsam, sinking into the earth. Here he is probably referring to the older formulations of Maya, where the sun generates the gold in the earth. Hence the gold, as Maya says, obtains a simplicity approaching that of the circle, symbol of eternity, and the indivisible point. The gold has a circular form. This is the line which runs back upon itself, like the snake that with its head bites its own tail, wherein that supreme and eternal painter and potter God may rightly be discerned. The gold is a twice bisected circle, one divided into 4 quadrants and therefore a quaternity, a division made by nature that contraries may be bound together by contraries. It can therefore, he says, be compared to the sacred city, Jerusalem. Compare Revelation 21:10 FE. It is a golden castle, engirt with a triple wall, a visible image of eternity. Though gold be mute, so far as sound or voice is concerned, yet by virtue of its essence, it proclaims and everywhere bears witness to God. And just as God is one in essence, so the gold is one homogeneous substance. For dawn, the unity of God, the unarius, is the center of the tenarius, the latter corresponding to the circle drawn round the center. The point as the center of the quaternio of the elements is the place where Mercurius digests and perfects. The point is identical with the scintilla, the little soul spark of Meister Eckhart. We find it already in the teachings of Saturninus. Similarly, Heraclitus, the physicist, is said to have conceived the soul as a spark of stellar essence. Hippolytus says that in the doctrine of the Sethians, the darkness held the brightness and the spark of light in thrall, and that this smallest of sparks was finely mingled in the dark waters below. Simon Magus likewise teaches that in semen and milk there is a very small spark which increases and becomes a power boundless and immutable. Alchemy too has its doctrine of the scintilla. In the first place, it is the fiery center of the earth, where the four elements project their seed in ceaseless movement. For all things have their origin in this source, and nothing in the whole world is born save from this source. In the center dwells the archeus, the servant of nature, whom Paracelsus also calls Vulcan, identifying him with the Adech, the great man. The archeus, the creative center of the earth, is hermaphroditic, like the protanthropos, as is clear from the epilogue to the Novum Lumen of Sendivogius. When a man is illuminated by the light of nature, the mist vanishes from his eyes, and without difficulty he may behold the point of our magnet, which corresponds to both centers of the rays, that is, those of the sun and the earth. This cryptic sentence is elucidated by the following example. When you place a 12-year-old boy side by side with a girl of the same age and dressed the same, you cannot distinguish between them. But take their clothes off and the difference will become apparent. According to this, the center consists in a conjunction of male and female. This is confirmed in a text by Abraham Eliezer, where the arcane substance laments being in the state of Negredo. Through Cham the Egyptian I must pass. Noah must wash me in the deepest sea, that my blackness may depart. I must be fixed to this black cross, and must be cleansed therefrom with wretchedness and vinegar, and made white, that my heart may shine like a carbuncle, and the old Adam come forth from me again. O Adam Kadmon, how beautiful art thou! Like Kedar I am black henceforth. Ah, how long? O come, my Mesech, and disrobe me, that mine inner beauty may be revealed. O Shulamite, afflicted within and without, the watchman of the great city will find thee and wound thee, and rob thee of thy garments, and take away thy veil. Who then will lead me out from Edom, from thy stout wall? Yet shall I be blissful again when I am delivered from the poison wherewith I am accursed, and my inmost seed and first birth comes forth. For its father is the sun, and its mother the moon. It is clear from this text that the hidden thing, the invisible center, is Adam Kadmon, the original man of Jewish gnosis. It is he who laments in the prisons of the darkness, and who is personified by the black Shulamite of the Song of Songs. He is the product of the conjunction of sun and moon. The scintillae often appear as golden and silver, and are found in multiple form in the earth. They are then called oculi piscium, fish's eyes. The fish's eyes are frequently mentioned by the authors, probably first by Maurianus Romanus, and in the Tractatus Aristotelis, and then by many later ones. In Manget there is a symbol, ascribed to the philosopher Malus, which shows eyes in the stars, in the clouds, in the water, and in the earth. The caption says, "This stone is under you, and near you, and above you, and around you." The eyes indicate that the lapis is in the process of evolution and grows from these ubiquitous eyes. Ripley remarks that at the desiccation of the sea, a substance is left over that shines like a fish's eye. According to Dawn, this shining eye is the sun, which plunges the center of its eye into the heart of man, as if it were the secret of warmth and illumination. The fish's eye is always open, like the eye of God. Something of the sort must have been in the mind of the alchemists, as is evidenced by the fact that Irenaeus Orandus used as a motto for his edition of Nicholas Flamel the words of Zechariah 4:10, "And they shall rejoice and see the plummet, lapidem stanium, in the hand of Zorobabel. These are the 7 eyes of the Lord that run to and fro through the whole earth." 3. 9 is also relevant. Upon one stone there are 7 eyes, DV. Firmicus Maternus may be referring to the latter passage when he says, "The sign of one profane sacrament is God from the rock." The other is the stone which God promised to send to strengthen the foundations of the promised Jerusalem. Christ is signified to us by the venerable stone. Just as the one stone meant, for the alchemists, the lapis, so the fish's eyes meant the 7 eyes, or the one eye of God, which is the sun. The Egyptians held that the eye is the seat of the soul. For example, Osiris is hidden in the eye of Horus. In alchemy, the eye is the coelum, heaven. It is like an eye and a seeing of the soul, whereby the state of the soul and her intentions are ofttimes made known to us, and through the rays and the glance of heaven all things take form. In Stebe's view, which agrees with that of Marsilius Ficinus, the coelum is a virtus, indeed a certain perfect living being. Hence the alchemists called their quinta essentia coelum. The idea of a virtus is borne out by the description of the Holy Ghost as an eye, a parallel to the invocation to Hermes, the eye of heaven. The eye of God emits power and light. Likewise, the fish's eyes are tiny soul sparks from which the shining figure of the Phileus is put together. They correspond to the particles of light imprisoned in the dark physis, whose reconstitution was one of the chief aims of Gnosticism and Manichaeism. There is a similar nexus of ideas in the Siddha Sila of Jainism. The Loka world is held in the middle of the Aloka void, in the form of the trunk of a man, with Siddha Sila at the top, the place where the head should be. This Siddhasila is the abode of the omniscient souls, and may be called the spiritual eye of the universe. The eye, like the sun, is a symbol, as well as an allegory of consciousness. In alchemy, the scintillae are put together to form the gold, soul. In the Gnostic systems, the atoms of light are reintegrated. Psychologically, this doctrine testifies to the personality or ego character of psychic complexes. Just as the distinguishing mark of the ego complex is consciousness, so it is possible that other unconscious complexes may possess, as splinter psyches, a certain luminosity of their own. From these atoms is produced the monad, and the lapis in its various significations. In agreement with the teachings of Epicurus, who held that the concourse of atoms even produced God. In his chapter on knowledge, Dawn uses the concept of the scintillae in moral form. Let every man consider diligently in his heart what has been said above, and thus little by little he will come to see with his mental eyes a number of sparks shining day by day, and more, and growing into such a great light that thereafter all things needful to him will be made known. This light is the light of nature. As Dawn says in his Philosophia Meditativa, "What madness deludes you? For in you and not proceeding from you, he wills all this to be found, which you seek outside you and not within yourselves. Such is the vice of the common man, to despise everything his own, and always to lust after the strange. The light of men, shineth in us, albeit dimly, and as though in darkness. It is not to be sought as proceeding from us, though it is in us, and not of us, but of him to whom it belongeth, who hath deigned to make us his dwelling place. He hath implanted that light in us, that we may see in its light the light of him who dwelleth in light inaccessible, and that we may excel his other creatures. In this especially we are made like unto him, that he hath given us a spark of his light. Thus the truth is to be sought not in ourselves, but in the image of God which is within us. In Dawn's view, there is in man an invisible sun, which he identifies with the Archeus. This sun is identical with the sun in the earth, in agreement with the passage from Novum Lumen, Supra, paragraph 43. The invisible sun enkindles an elemental fire which consumes man's substance and reduces his body to the prima materia. It is also compared with salt or natural balsam, which has in itself corruption and protection against corruption. This paradoxical aspect is borne out by a curious saying, "Man is the bait, wherein the sparks struck by the flint Mercurius and by the steel heaven seize upon the tinder and show their power." Mercurius as the flint is evidently thought of here in his feminine, chthonic form, and heaven stands for his masculine, spiritual quintessence. From the nuptial impact between the two, the spark is struck. The Archeus, which is a corrupter of the body, just as the chemist is a corrupter of metals. This negative aspect of the scintilla is remarkable, but it agrees very well with the alchemists' less optimistic medico-scientific view of the world. For them, the dark side of the world and of life had not been conquered, and this was the task they set themselves in their work. In their eyes, the fire point, the divine center in man, was something dangerous, a powerful poison, which required very careful handling if it was to be changed into the panacea. The process of individuation, likewise, has its own specific dangers. Dawn expresses the standpoint of the alchemists in his fine saying, "There is nothing in nature that does not contain as much evil as good." In Kunrath, the scintilla is the same as the elixir. Now the elixir is well and truly called a shining splendor, or perfect scintilla of him who alone is the mighty and strong. It is the true aquapermanence, eternally living. The radical moisture is animated by a fiery spark of the world soul, for the Spirit of the Lord filleth the whole world. He also speaks of a plurality of sparks. There are fiery sparks of the world soul, that is, of the light of nature, dispersed or scattered at God's command in and through the fabric of the great world, into all fruits of the elements everywhere. The scintilla is associated with the doctrine of the anthropos. The Son of the great world is filled, animated and impregnated with a fiery spark of Ruach Elohim, the spirit, breath, wind or blowing of the triune God, from the body, spirit and soul of the world, or sulfur and salt, mercury and the universal fiery spark of the light of nature. The fiery sparks of the world soul were already in the chaos, the prima materia, at the beginning of the world. Kunrath rises to Gnostic heights when he exclaims, "And our Catholic Mercury, by virtue of his universal fiery spark of the light of nature, is beyond doubt Proteus, the sea god of the ancient pagan sages, who hath the key to the sea and all power over all things, son of Oceanos and Tethys." Many centuries lie between Monoimos and Kunrath. The teachings of Monoimos were completely unknown in the Middle Ages, and yet Kunrath hit upon very similar thoughts which can hardly be ascribed to tradition. These paradoxes culminate in an allegedly ancient monument, an epitaph said to have been found in Bologna, known as the Aelia Laelia Crispis inscription. It was appropriated by the alchemists who claimed, in the words of Michael Mayer, that it was set up by an artificer of old to the honor of God and in praise of the chymic art. I will first give the text of this highly remarkable inscription. Diem Aelia Laelia Crispis, nec mulier, nec androgyna, nec puella, nec juvenis, nec anus, nec casta, nec meretrix, nec pudica, sed omnia. Sublata neque fame, nec ferro, nec veneno, sed omnibus. Nec coelo, nec aquis, nec terris, sed ubique easet. Lucius agatho precius, nec maritus, nec amator, nec necessarius, neque moerens, neque gaudens, neque flens, hans neque molem, nec pyramidem, nec sepulchrum, sed omnia. Sit et nescit, quid qui posuerit. Hoc est sepulchrum intus cadaver non habens. Hoc est cadaver, sepulchrum extra non habens, sed cadaver idem est et sepulchrum sibi, which translates to Diem Aelia Laelia Crispis, neither man nor woman, nor mongrel, nor maid, nor boy, nor crone, nor chaste, nor whore, nor virtuous, but all. Carried away neither by hunger, nor by sword, nor by poison, but by all. Neither in heaven, nor in earth, nor in water, but everywhere is her resting place. Lucius agatho precius, neither husband, nor lover, nor kinsman, neither mourning, nor rejoicing, nor weeping, raised up, neither mound, nor pyramid, nor tomb, but all. He knows and knows not what he raised up to whom. This is a tomb that has no body in it. This is a body that has no tomb round it, but body and tomb are the same. Let it be said at once, this epitaph is sheer nonsense, a joke, but one that for centuries brilliantly fulfilled its function as a flypaper for every conceivable projection that buzzed in the human mind. It gave rise to a cause célèbre, a regular psychological affair that lasted for the greater part of 2 centuries and produced a spate of commentaries, finally coming to an inglorious end as one of the spurious texts of the Corpus Inscriptionum Latinarum, and thereafter passing into oblivion. The reason why I'm digging up this curiosity again in the 20th century is that it serves as a paradigm for that peculiar attitude of mind which made it possible for the men of the Middle Ages to write hundreds of treatises about something that did not exist and was therefore completely unknowable. The interesting thing is not this futile stalking horse, but the projections it aroused. There is revealed in them an extraordinary propensity to come out with the wildest fantasies and speculations, a psychic condition which is met with today in a correspondingly erudite milieu, only as an isolated pathological phenomenon. In such cases, one always finds that the unconscious is under some kind of pressure and is charged with highly effective contents. Sometimes a differential diagnosis, as between tomfoolery and creativity, is difficult to make, and it happens again and again that the two are confused. Such phenomena, whether historical or individual, cannot be explained by causality alone, but must also be considered from the point of view of what happened afterwards. Everything psychic is pregnant with the future. The 16th and 17th centuries were a time of transition from a world founded on metaphysics to an era of immanentist explanatory principles, the motto no longer being omne animal adeo, but omne vivum ex ovo. What was then brewing in the unconscious came to fruition in the tremendous development of the natural sciences, whose youngest sister is empirical psychology. Everything that was naively presumed to be a knowledge of transcendental and divine things, which human beings can never know with certainty, and everything that seemed to be irretrievably lost with the decline of the Middle Ages, rose up again with the discovery of the psyche. This premonition of future discoveries in the psychic sphere expressed itself in the phantasmagoric speculations of philosophers who until then had appeared to be the arch-peddlers of sterile verbiage. However nonsensical and insipid the Aelia Laelia epitaph may look, it becomes significant when we regard it as a question which no less than 2 centuries have asked themselves. What is it that you do not understand and can only be expressed in unfathomable paradoxes? Naturally, I do not lay this question at the door of that unknown humorist who perpetrated this practical joke. It existed long before him in alchemy, nor would he ever have dreamt that his joke would become a cause célèbre, or that it would lead his contemporaries and successors to question the nature of the psychic background, a question which in the distant future was to replace the certainties of revealed truth. He was only a causa instrumentalis, and his victims, as naive and innocent as himself, made their first involuntary steps as psychologists. It seems that the first report of the Aelia Laelia inscription appeared in the treatise of a certain Marius L. Michael Angelus of Venice in the year 1548, and as early as 1683, Caesar Malvasius had collected no less than 45 attempts at interpretation. In alchemical literature, the treatise of the physician Nicolas Barnot of Crest, Dauphine, who lived in the second half of the 16th century, has been preserved. He gave an alchemical interpretation of the inscription in, it appears, 1597. To begin with, I shall keep to his interpretation and that of the learned Michael Meyer. Meyer maintains that Aelia and Laelia represent 2 persons who are united in a single subject, named Crispis. Barnot calls Aelia solar, presumably a derivation from sun. Laelia he interprets as lunar. Crispis, curly-haired, thinks Meyer, comes from the curly hairs which are converted into a very fine powder. Meyer obviously has in mind the tincture, the arcane substance. Barnot, on the other hand, says that our materia is obvoluta, intricata, therefore curly. These 2 persons, says Meyer, are neither man nor woman, but they once were. Similarly, the subject was in the beginning an hermaphrodite, but no longer is so, because though the arcane substance is composed of sponsus and sponsa, and is thus as it were bisexual, as a third thing it is new and unique. Neither is the subject a maid or virgin, because she would be intact. In the opus, however, the virgin is called a mother, although she has remained a virgin. Nor is the subject a boy, because the consummation of the coniunctio contradicts this, nor a crone, because it still retains its full strength, nor a whore, because it has nothing to do with money, nor is it virtuous, because the virgin has cohabited with a man. The subject, he says, is a man and a woman, because they have completed the conjugal act, and an hermaphrodite because 2 bodies are united in one. It is a girl because it is not yet old, and a youth because it is in full possession of its powers. It is an old woman because it outlasts all time, in other words, is incorruptible. It is a whore because Bea prostituted herself to Gabritius before marriage. It is virtuous because the subsequent marriage gave absolution. But all is the real explanation of the enigma. All these designations refer to qualities of the one thing, and these were thought of as existing, but they are not entities in themselves. The same is true of the carried away passage. The substance, Ouroboros, devours itself and thus suffers no hunger. It does not die by the sword, but slays itself with its own dart, like the scorpion, which is another synonym for the arcane substance. It is not killed by poison because, as Barno says, it is a good poison, a panacea with which it brings itself to life again. At the same time, it is killed by all three, by hunger for itself, by the sword of Mercurius, and by its own poisonous snake or scorpion. By all again points to the arcane substance, as Barno says. This is everything. It has within itself everything needful for its completion. Everything can be predicated of it, and it of everything. For the one is the whole, as the greatest chymist saith. Because of the one everything is, and if the whole had not the whole in itself, the whole would not be. That the arcanum is neither in heaven nor on earth, nor in water, is explained by Meyer as a reference to the lapis, which is found everywhere. It is found in all the elements and not only in one of them. Here, Barno is rather more subtle, for he equates heaven with the soul, earth with the body, and water with the spirit, and thus arrives at the idea of the wholeness of a living organism. Our material, he says, is simultaneously in heaven, on earth, and in the water, as if wholly in the whole and wholly in each part, so that those parts, though otherwise divisible, can no longer be separated from one another after they are made one. The whole law and profits of alchemy seem to depend upon this. Barno explains the name of him who raised the tomb, Lucius Agathopricius, as follows. Lucius is lucid, endowed with the most lucid intellect. Agatho is good-natured, general knowledge good, upright. Pricius is priscus, pristine, senior of ancient time, reckoned among those upright philosophers of old. Meyer maintains that these names signified the chief requisite necessary for the fulfillment of the art. Neither husband nor lover, etc., means that Aelia Laelia drew him to herself as the magnet the iron and changed him into her nebulous and black nature. In the Coniunctio he became her husband and was necessary to the work. But Meyer does not tell us to what extent he was not the husband, etc. Barno says, these are the chief causes, namely marriage, love, and consanguinity, which move a man to raise a column to the dead in the temple of memory, and none of these can here be considered. Lucius had another purpose in mind. He wished the art which teaches everything, which is of all things the most precious and is concealed under this enigma, to appear upon the scene, so that the investigators might apply themselves to the art and true science, which surpasses all else in worth. True, he makes an exception of that holiest investigation, agnitionem, of God and Christ, whereon our salvation depends, a proviso we often meet in the texts. Meyer ignores the negative in neither mourning, etc., just as he did in neither husband. In truth, he says, all this can as well be said positively of Lucius, and not negatively. On the other hand, Barno remarks that it draws a picture of an intrepid philosopher, smooth and rounded. Neither mound, etc., is again explained positively by Meyer. Aelia is herself the mound, which endures as something firm and immovable. This is a reference to the incorruptibility which the opus sought to achieve. He says the pyramid signifies a flame to eternal remembrance, and this was Aelia herself. She was buried because Lucius did everything he had to do in her name. He takes her place, as it were, just as the filius Philosophorum takes the place of the maternal prima materia, which till then had been the only effective arcane substance. Barno declares that though Lucius is a building, it does not fulfill its purpose, since it is a symbol. But all he refers to the tabula smaragdina, because the epitaph as a whole points to the medicina summa et catholica. By he knows and knows not, Meyer thinks that Lucius knew it at first, but no longer knew it afterwards, because he himself was ungratefully forgotten. It is not clear to me what this is intended to mean. Barno takes the monument as an allegory of the lapis, of which Lucius knew. He explains the quid as quantum, for Lucius probably did not know how much the stone weighed. Neither, of course, did he know for what future discoverer he had made the inscription. Barno's explanation of quid is decidedly feeble. It would be more to the point to remember that the lapis is a fabulous entity of cosmic dimensions which surpasses human understanding. Consideration for the prestige of the alchemist may have prevented him from indulging this suggestive thought. For as an alchemist, he could not very well admit that the artifacts himself did not know what he was producing with his art. Had he been a modern psychologist, he might have realized, with a little effort, that man's totality, the self, is by definition beyond the bounds of knowledge. With this is a tomb, etc. We reach the first positive statement, barring the names, of the inscription. Maya's opinion is that this has nothing to do with the tomb, which was no tomb, but that Aelia herself is meant. For she herself is the container, converting into herself the contained, and thus she is a tomb or receptacle that has no body or content in it, as was said of Lot's wife, who was her own tomb without a body, and a body without a tomb. He is evidently alluding to the second version of the Arislius vision, which says, "With so much love did Bea embrace Gabricus, that she absorbed him wholly into her own nature and dissolved him into indivisible particles." Ripley says that at the death of the king, all his limbs were torn into atoms. This is the motif of dismemberment, which is well known in alchemy. The atoms are, or become, white sparks shining in the terra foetida. They are also called the fish's eyes. The explanation of Aelia herself as the tomb would naturally appeal to an alchemist, as this motif plays a considerable role in the literature. He called his vessel a tomb, or, as in the Rosarium, a red tumulus of rock. The Turba says that a tomb must be dug for the dragon and the woman. Interment is identical with the Nigredo. A Greek treatise describes the alchemical process as the 8 graves. Alexander found the tomb of Hermes when he discovered the secret of the art. The king is buried in Saturn, an analogy of the buried Osiris. While the Nigredo of the burial endures, the woman rules, referring to the eclipse of the sun or the conjunction with the new moon. Thus concludes Maya, tomb and body are the same. Barneau says, "Bury, they say, each thing in the grave of the other. For when sulfur, sal and aqua, or sol, luna and mercurius are in our material, they must be extracted, conjoined, buried and mortified and turned into ashes. Thus it comes to pass that the nest of the birds becomes their grave, and conversely, the birds absorb the nest and unite themselves firmly with it. This comes to pass, I say, that soul, spirit and body, man and woman, active and passive, in one and the same subject, when placed in the vessel, heated with their own fire and sustained by the outward majesty of the art, may in due time escape to freedom." In these words, the whole secret of the union of opposites is revealed, the summa medicina, which heals not only the body but the spirit. The word escape presupposes a state of imprisonment, which is brought to an end by the union of opposites. The Hindus describe this as nirdvandva, free from the opposites, a conception that, in this form at least, is alien to the Christian West because it relativizes the opposites and is intended to mitigate or even heal the irreconcilable conflict in the militant Christian attitude. The interpretation here given of this enigmatic inscription should be taken for what it is, a testament to the alchemical way of thinking, which in this instance reveals more about itself than the epitaph would seem to warrant. But here we must tread carefully, for a good many other explanations are possible and have, in fact, been given. Above all, we have to consider the genuineness of the monument and its origin. None of the 3 authors so far mentioned actually saw the inscription. At the time of Malvasius in 1683, there were apparently only 2 original transcripts of it, one in Bologna, the other in Milan. The one in Bologna ends with the words "qui posuerit." The other, in Milan, adds "hoc est sepulchrum," etc., and also a quid to the "sit et nescit" of the Bologna version. Further, at the head of the Milan version there is an unelucidated AMPPD in place of the DM, Dies Manibus, at the head of the other. Malvasius states that the monument was destroyed, but he cites eyewitnesses who claim to have seen the inscription and copied it. In particular, Joannes Turrius of Bruges, who, in January 1567, wrote a letter to Richardus Vetus, Richard White of Basingstoke, saying that he had read the epitaph with his own eyes in the villa of Marcus Antonius de la Volta, at the first milestone outside the Porta Masciarella, Bologna. It was, as the eyewitness and commentator Johannes Casparius Gevatius reports, let into the wall joining the villa to the church. A few of the chiseled letters were worn with time and corroded by a kind of rust, which, he says, testified to its antiquity. Malvasius endeavored to prove its genuineness with the help of numerous other Roman epitaphs and advanced the following theory. The inscription speaks of a daughter who is to be born to Laelius and who is destined for Agatho as a bride. But she is neither daughter nor bride, because though conceived, she is not born, and not born because she miscarried. Therefore Agatho, long chosen as the husband, disappointed in such great hope and betrayed by fate, rightly mocks himself, or pretends to mock himself, with this enigmatic inscription. Malvasius goes out of his way to be fair to the author of the epitaph. He calls Agatho very skilled in this science and that. Indeed, he compares him as being a preeminent worshipper of the exceedingly auspicious number 3 to Hermes Trismegistus, and calls him thrice greatest, an allusion to the concluding sentence of the Tabula Smaragdina. He does this because the inscription is divided into 3 parts, to which he devotes a long dissertation. Here he gets into difficulties with the 4 elements and the 4 qualities, and like all the alchemists, flounders about in his attempts to interpret the axiom of Maria. His idea of a miscarriage likewise comes within the sphere of alchemy, not to mention Gnosticism, for we read in the Tractatus Aristotelis, "This serpent is impetuous, seeking the issue death before birth, wishing to lose the fetus, and desiring a miscarriage." This refers, of course, to the mercurial serpent, or prima materia, which, the treatise maintains, strives to pass quickly through the transformation process and to force the light seeds of the anima mundi, hidden within it, into flower. Of the numerous interpretations made by the commentators, I would like to mention one which seems to me worth rescuing from oblivion. This is the view expressed by the 2 friends of Malvasius, namely that Lucius Agatho was a real person, but that Aelia was a fictitious woman, or perhaps an evil genius in female form, or an ungodly spirit who, in the opinion of one of them, flies about in the air, and according to the other dwells in the earth, and was enclosed and affixed in a Junonian oak. A sylvan sprite, nymph, or hamadryad, who, when the oak was cut down and burnt, was obliged to seek another dwelling place, and so was found as if dead in this sarcophagus. Thus it was that she was praised, described, and commemorated by the loved and loving Agatho. According to this interpretation, Aelia is Agatho's anima, projected into a Junonian oak. The oak is the tree of Jupiter, but it is also sacred to Juno. In a metaphorical sense, as the feminine carrier of the anima projection, it is Jupiter's spouse and Agatho's beloved. Mythologically, nymphs, dryads, etc. are nature and tree noumena, but psychologically they are anima projections, so far as masculine statements are concerned. This interpretation can be found in the dendrologia of one of the above-mentioned friends, Ulysses Aldrovandus. I maintain that Aelia Laelia Crispis was one of the hamadryads, who was tied to an oak in the neighborhood of the city of Bologna, or shut up inside it. She appeared to him both in the tenderest and in the harshest form. And while for some 2,000 years she had made a show of inconstant looks like a Proteus, she bedeviled the love of Lucius Agatho Priscius, then a citizen of Bologna, with anxious cares and sorrows, which assuredly were conjured up from chaos, or from what Plato calls Agathonian confusion. One can hardly imagine a better description of the feminine archetype that typifies a man's unconscious than the figure of this most hazardous beloved, incertissima Amasia, who pursues him like a teasing sprite amid the stillness of the groves and springs. It is clear from the text of the inscription that it gives no ground for interpreting Aelia as a wood nymph. Aldrovandus tells us, however, that the Porta Masciarella in Bologna, near which the inscription was alleged to have been found, was called Junonia in Roman times, from which he concludes that Juno was obviously the spiritus loci. In support of his hypothesis that Aelia was a dryad, the learned humanist cites a Roman epitaph that was found in this region. Claudia Plavtilla sibi et querconio Agathoni marito optimo. This epitaph does in fact occur in the Corpus Inscriptionum Latinarum, but there the operative words are Q Verconio Agathoni. So Quintus Verconius must suffer his name to be changed to Querconius to suit the author. Aldrovandus explains the puzzling hoc est sepulchrum by saying that the oak supplied the necessary building material for the tomb. In substantiation of this, he adds that there was in that locality a village with the name of Casaralta, which he analyzes into casa, house, ara, altar, alta, high. As a further contribution, he quotes an Italian poem about a great oak, representing, he says, the world of the elements, planted as it were in a heavenly garden, where sun and moon are spread out like two flowers. This allusion to the world oak of Pherecydes leads us straight to the sun and moon tree of alchemy, to the red and white lily, the red slave and the white woman, or white dove, and the four-hued blossoms of the tree in the western land. Reusner's Pandora portrays the tree as a torch-bearing woman, its top sprouting out of her crowned head. Here the tree is personified by its feminine numen. Aldrovandus's interpretation is essentially alchemical, as we can see from the treatise of Bernardus Trevisanus, Count of the March and Trevis, 140690. He tells the parable of an adept who finds a clear spring set about with the finest stone and secured to the trunk of an oak tree, the whole surrounded by a wall. This is the king's bath in which he seeks renewal. An old man, Hermes the Mystagogue, explains how the king had this bath built. He placed in it an old oak, cloven in the midst. The fountain was surrounded by a thick wall, and first it was enclosed in hard, bright stone, then in a hollow oak. The point of the parable, evidently, is to bring the oak into connection with the bath. Usually, this is the nuptial bath of the royal pair. But here the queen is missing, for it is only the king who is renewed. This unusual version of the motif suggests that the oak, as the feminine numen, has taken the place of the queen. If this assumption is correct, it is particularly significant that the oak is first said to be cloven and later to be hollow. Now it seems to be the upright trunk or stock of the fountain, now a living tree casting a shadow, now the trough of the fountain. This ambiguity refers to the different aspects of the tree. As the stock, the oak is the source of the fountain, so to speak. As the trough, it is the vessel, and as the protecting tree, it is the mother. From ancient times, the tree was man's birthplace. It is therefore a source of life. The alchemists called both the vessel and the bath the womb. The cloven or hollow trunk bears out this interpretation. The king's bath is itself a matrix, the tree serving as an attribute of the latter. Often, as in the Ripley scroll, the tree stands in the nuptial bath either as a pillar or directly as a tree in whose branches the numen appears in the shape of a mermaid, which is anima, with a snake's tail. The analogy with the tree of knowledge is obvious. The Dodonian oak was the abode of an oracle, the anima here playing the role of prophetess. The snake-like Mercurius appears as a tree numen in Grimm's fairy tale of the spirit in the bottle. The tree has a remarkable relation to the old man in the turba. Take that white tree and build around it a round dark house covered with dew, and place in it a man of great age, 100 years old, and close the house upon them and make it fast, so that no wind or dust can get in. Then leave them for 180 days in their house. I say that that old man ceases not to eat of the fruits of that tree until the completion of that number 180. And that old man becomes a youth. Oh, what wondrous natures, which have changed the soul of that old man into a youthful body, and the father the son. In this context, we may perhaps cite a rather obscure text from Senior. Likewise, Marcos said, "It is time for this child to be born," and he related the following parable. "We shall build him a house, which is called the grave of Sihoka. He or Maria said, 'There is an earth near us, which is called Tormos, where there are serpents or witches that eat the darkness out of the burning stones, and on these stones they drink the blood of black goats. While they remain in the darkness, they conceive in the baths and give birth in the air, and they stride on the sea, and they inhabit vaults and sepulchres, and the serpent fights with the male, and the male continues 40 nights in the grave, and 40 nights in the little house. The Latin translation serpent for which is connected with the widespread primitive idea that the spirits of the dead are snakes. This fits in with the offering of goat's blood, since the sacrifice of black animals to the chthonic noumena was quite customary. In the Arabic text, the witches refer to the female demons of the desert, the jinn. The grave-haunting numen is likewise a widespread idea that has lingered on into Christian legend. I've even met it in the dream of a 22-year-old theological student, and I give this dream again so that those of my readers who are familiar with the language of dreams will be able to see the full scope of the problem we are discussing. The dreamer was standing in the presence of a handsome old man dressed entirely in black. He knew it was the white magician. This personage had just addressed him at considerable length, but the dreamer could no longer remember what it was about. He recalled only the closing words. And for this, we need the help of the black magician. At that moment, the door opened, and in came another old man exactly like the first, except that he was dressed in white. He said to the white magician, "I need your advice," but threw a sidelong questioning glance at the dreamer, whereupon the white magician answered, "You can speak freely. He is an innocent." The white-clad black magician then related his story. He had come from a distant land where something extraordinary had happened. The country was ruled by an old king who felt his death near and had therefore sought out a worthy tomb for himself. There were in that land a great number of tombs from ancient times, and the king had chosen the finest for himself. According to legend, it was the tomb of a virgin who had died long ago. The king caused it to be opened in order to get it ready for use. But when the bones were exposed to the light of day, they suddenly took on life and changed into a black horse, which galloped away into the desert. The black magician had heard this story, and immediately set forth in pursuit of the horse. After a journey of many days through the desert, he reached the grasslands on the other side. There he met the horse grazing, and there also he came upon the find on account of which he now needed the advice of the white magician. For he had found the lost keys of paradise, and he did not know what to do with them. Here the dream ended. The tomb was obviously haunted by the spirit of the virgin who played the part of the king's anima. Like the nymph in Malvasius, she was forced to leave her old dwelling place. Her chthonic and somber nature is shown by her transformation into a black horse, a kind of demon of the desert. We have here the widespread conception of the anima as horsewoman and nightmare, a real ungodly spirit, and at the same time the well-known fairy tale motif of the aging king whose vitality is at an end. As a sous-entendu, a magical, life-renewing marriage with the nymph seems to be planned somewhat in the manner of the immortal Merlin's marriage with his fairy. For in paradise, the garden of love with the apple tree, all opposites are united. As Isaiah says, "He will make her wilderness like Eden, and her desert like the garden of the Lord." 51:3. There the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. And the cow and the bear shall feed, their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. And the suckling child shall play on the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the cockatrice's den. 11:6f. There white and black come together in kingly marriage, as a bridegroom decketh himself with ornaments, and as a bride adorneth herself with her jewels. 61:10. The two antithetical magicians are obviously making ready the work of union, and what this must mean for a young theologian can be conceived only as that colossal problem whose solution was considered by the more speculative alchemists to be their chief task. Therefore the senior text continues. He, the male, will be roused like the white doves, and his step shall rejoice. And he shall cast his seed upon the marble into the image or spirit that dwells in the marble, and the ravens will come flying, and will fall upon it and gather it up. Then they will fly to the tops of the mountains, whither none can climb, and they will become white and multiply. Likewise, no man hath known this, unless he himself hath conceived it in his head. This text describes the resurrection after death, and if we are not deceived, it takes the form of a coniunctio, a coming together of the white, dove, and the black, raven, the latter being the spirit that dwells in the tombstone. Since, as often happens, theriomorphic symbols, snakes and doves, are used for the male and female elements, this points to the union of unconscious factors. The ravens that gather up the seed, or the product of the union, and then fly with it to the tops of the mountains, represent the helpful spirits or familiars who complete the work when the skill of the artifacts has failed him. They are not, as in Faust, beautiful angels but dark messengers of heaven, who at this point themselves become white. Even in Faust, the angels are not entirely innocent of the arts of seduction, and the angel's inability to sin is, as we know, to be taken so relatively that women have to keep their heads covered in church on account of the moral frailty of these winged messengers, which has more than once proved disastrous in ancient times. For example, Genesis 6:2. Similar motifs occur in modern dreams and can be found in persons who have never been remotely concerned with alchemy. For instance, a patient had the following dream. A large pile of wood was burning at the foot of a high wall of rock. The flames shot up with clouds of smoke. It was a lonely and romantic spot. High in the air, a flock of great black birds circled round the fire. From time to time, one of the birds plunged straight into the blaze and was joyfully burnt to death, turning white in the process. As the dreamer himself remarked, the dream had a numinous quality, and this is quite understandable in view of its meaning. It repeats the miracle of the phoenix, of transformation and rebirth. The transformation of the nigredo into the albedo, of unconsciousness into illumination, as described in the verses from the Rosarium Philosophorum. Two eagles fly up with feathers aflame. Naked, they fall to earth again. Yet in full feather they rise up soon. After this digression on transformation and resurrection, let us turn back to the motif of the oak tree, whose discussion was started by the commentators on the Enigma. We come across the oak in yet another alchemical treatise, the Introitus Apertus of Philoletha. There he says, "Learn then who are the companions of Cadmus, who is the serpent that devoured them, and what the hollow oak to which Cadmus spitted the serpent." In order to clarify this passage, I must go back to the myth of Cadmus, a kinsman of the Pelasgian Hermes Ithyphalikos. The hero set out to find his lost sister Europa, whom Zeus had carried away with him after turning himself into a bull. Cadmus, however, received the divine command to give up the search and instead to follow a cow with moon markings on both her sides until she lay down and there to found the city of Thebes. At the same time, he was promised Harmonia, the daughter of Ares and Aphrodite, as a wife. When the cow had lain down, he wanted to sacrifice her, and he sent his companions to fetch water. They found it in a grove sacred to Ares, which was guarded by a dragon, the son of Ares. The dragon killed most of the companions, and Cadmus, enraged, slew it and sowed the dragon's teeth. Immediately armed men sprang up, who fell to fighting among themselves until only 5 remained. Cadmus was then given Harmonia to wife. The spitting of the snake, dragon, to the oak seems to be an addition of Philoletha's. It represents the banishment of the dangerous demon into the oak, a point made not only by the commentary on the Aelia inscription in Malvasius, but by the fairy tale of the spirit in the bottle. The psychological meaning of the myth is clear. Cadmus has lost his sister Anima because she has flown with the supreme deity into the realm of the suprahuman and the subhuman, the unconscious. At the divine command, he is not to regress to the incest situation, and for this reason he is promised a wife. His sister Anima, acting as a psychopomp in the shape of a cow to correspond with the bull of Zeus, leads him to his destiny as a dragon slayer. For the transition from the brother-sister relationship to an exogamous one is not so simple. But when he succeeds in this, he wins Harmonia, who is the dragon's sister. The dragon is obviously disharmony, as the armed men sprung from its teeth prove. These kill one another off, as though exemplifying the maxim of Pseudo-Democritus, nature subdues nature, which is nothing less than the Ouroboros conceptually formulated. Cadmus holds fast to Harmonia while the opposites in projected forms slaughter one another. This image is a representation of the way in which a split-off conflict behaves. It is its own battleground. By and large, this is also true of Yang and Yin in classical Chinese philosophy. Hand in hand with this self-contained conflict, there goes an unconsciousness of the moral problem of opposites, Only with Christianity did the metaphysical opposites begin to percolate into man's consciousness, and then in the form of an almost dualistic opposition that reached its zenith in Manichaeism. This heresy forced the Church to take an important step, the formulation of the doctrine of the privatio bonae, by means of which she established the identity of good and being. Evil as something that does not exist was laid at man's door. Omne bonum ad Deo, omne malum ab homine. This idea, together with that of original sin, formed the foundation of a moral consciousness, which was a novel development in human history. One half of the polarity, till then essentially metaphysical, was reduced to a psychic factor, which meant that the devil had lost the game if he could not pick on some moral weakness in man. Good, however, remained a metaphysical substance that originated with God and not with man. Original sin had corrupted a creature originally good. As interpreted by dogma, therefore, good is still wholly projected, but evil only partly so, since the passions of men are its main source. Alchemical speculation continued this process of integrating metaphysical projections insofar as it began to dawn on the adept that both opposites were of a psychic nature. They expressed themselves first of all in the duplicity of Mercurius, which however was cancelled out in the unity of the stone. The lapis was, Deo concedente, made by the adept, and was recognized as an equivalent of the homo totus. This development was extremely important, because it was an attempt to integrate opposites that were previously projected. Cadmus is interpreted alchemically as Mercurius in his masculine form, Sol. He seeks his feminine counterpart, the Quicksilver, which is his sister, Luna. But she meets him in the shape of the mercurial serpent, which he must first kill because it contains the furious conflict of warring elements, the chaos. From this arises the harmony of the elements, and the coniunctio can now take place. The spoils of the struggle, in this case the dragon's skin, are, according to ancient custom, offered to the hollow oak, the mother, who is the representative of the sacred grove and the fount. In other words, it is offered up to the unconscious as the source of life, which produces harmony out of disharmony. Out of the hostility of the elements, there arises the bond of friendship between them, sealed in the stone, and this bond guarantees the indissolubility and incorruptibility of the lapis. This piece of alchemical logic is borne out by the fact that, according to the myth, Cadmus and Harmonia turned to stone, evidently because of an embarras de richesse. Perfect harmony is a dead end. In another version, they turn into snakes, and even into a basilisk. Dom Pernati remarks, for the end product of the work, incorporated with its like, acquires the power ascribed to the basilisk, so the philosophers say. For this fanciful author, Harmonia is naturally the prima materia, and the marriage of Cadmus, which took place with all the gods assisting, is the coniunctio of Sol and Luna, followed by the production of the tincture or lapis. Pernetti's interpretation of Harmonia would be correct only if she were still allied with the dragon. But since she lost the reptile, she had logically to change herself and her husband into snakes. Thus Malvasius, as well as the more interesting of the commentators, remain within the magic circle of alchemical mythologies. This is not surprising, since Hermetic philosophy, in the form it then took, was the only intellectual instrument that could help fill the dark gaps in the continuity of understanding. The Enigma of Bologna and its commentaries are, in fact, a perfect paradigm of the method of alchemy in general. It had exactly the same effect as the unintelligibility of chemical processes. The philosopher stared at the paradoxes of the Aelia inscription, just as he stared at the retort, until the archetypal structures of the collective unconscious began to illuminate the darkness. And unless we are completely deluded, the inscription itself seems to be a fantasy sprung from that same paradoxical massa confusa of the collective unconscious. The contradictoriness of the unconscious is resolved by the archetype of the nuptial coniunctio, by which the chaos becomes ordered. Any attempt to determine the nature of the unconscious state runs up against the same difficulties as atomic physics. The very act of observation alters the object observed. Consequently, there is at present no way of objectively determining the real nature of the unconscious. If we are not, as Malvasius was, convinced of the antiquity of the Aelia inscription, we must look round in the medieval literature for possible sources, or at least analogies. Here, the motif of the triple prediction, or triple cause, of death might put us on the right trail. This motif occurs in the Vita Merlini in the Old French romance Merlin, as well as in its later imitations in the Spanish and English literature of the 15th century. But the most important item, it seems to me, is the so-called epigram of the hermaphrodite, attributed to Mathieu de Vendôme, circa 1150. When my pregnant mother bore me in her womb, they said she asked the gods what she would bear. A boy, said Phoebus, a girl, said Mars, neither, said Juno, and when I was born, I was a hermaphrodite. Asked how I was to meet my end, the goddess replied, by arms, Mars, on the cross, Phoebus, by water, all were right. A tree overshadowed the waters, I climbed it, the sword I had with me slipped, and I with it. My foot caught in the branches, my head hung down in the stream, and I, male, female, and neither, suffered by water, weapon, and cross. Another parallel, but dating from late antiquity, is mentioned by Maya. It is one of the Platonic riddles and runs. A man that was not a man, seeing yet not seeing, in a tree that was not a tree, smote, but did not smite with a stone that was not a stone. A bird that was not a bird, sitting yet not sitting. The solution is, a one-eyed eunuch grazed with a pumice stone, a bat hanging from a bush. This joke was, of course, too obvious to lend itself to alchemical evaluation. Similarly, the epigram of the hermaphrodite was not, so far as I know, taken up by the alchemists, though it might have been a more suitable subject for exegesis. This kind of jest probably underlies the Aelia inscription. The seriousness with which the alchemists took it, however, is justified not only because there is something serious in every joke, but because paradox is the natural medium for expressing transconscious facts. Hindu philosophy, which likewise struggled to formulate transcendental concepts, often comes very near to the paradoxes so beloved of the alchemists, as the following example shows. I am not a man, neither am I a god, a goblin, a Brahmin, a warrior, a merchant, a Shudra, nor disciple of a Brahmin, nor householder, nor hermit of the forest, nor yet mendicant pilgrim. Awakener to myself is my name. This tomb has no body in it. This body has no tomb round it. But it is itself body and tomb. White, convinced that the monument was genuine, thinks that Agathias wrote his epigram in imitation of it, whereas in fact the epigram must be its predecessor, or at least have derived from the same source on which the unknown author of the Aelia inscription drew. Another source that needs seriously considering is mentioned by Richard White of Basingstoke. He maintains that Aelia Laelia is Niobe transformed, and he supports this interpretation by referring to an epigram attributed to Agathias Scholasticus, a Byzantine historian. Niobe seems to have an anima character for Richard White. For continuing his interpretation, he takes Aelia, or Halia as he calls her, to be the soul, saying with Virgil, fiery is her strength and heavenly her origin. From this Halia takes her name. She was called Laelia, he says, on account of Luna, who exerts a hidden influence on the souls of men. The human soul is androgynous because a girl has a masculine and a man a feminine soul. To this remarkable psychological insight he adds another. The soul is also called an old woman because the spirit of young people is weak. This aptly expresses the psychological fact that, in people with an all too youthful attitude of consciousness, the anima is often represented in dreams as an old woman. It is clear that Richard White points even more plainly to the anima in the psychological sense than Aldrovandus. But whereas the latter stressed her mythological aspect, White stresses her philosophical aspect. In his letter of February 1567 to Johannes Turius, he writes that the soul is an idea of such great power that she creates the forms and things themselves. Also, she has within herself the selfness of all mankind. She transcends all individual differences. Thus, if the soul would know herself, she must contemplate herself and gaze into that place where the power of the soul, wisdom, dwells. This is just what happened to the interpreters of the Bolognese inscription. In the darkness of the enigma, the psyche gazed at herself and perceived the wisdom immanent in her structure, the wisdom that is her strength. And he adds, man is nothing other than his soul. It should be noted that he describes this soul quite differently. from the way it would be described by a biological or personalistic psychology today. It is devoid of all individual differences. It contains the selfness of all mankind. It even creates the objective world by the power of its wisdom. This description is far better suited, one would think, to the anima mundi than to the anima vagula of the personal man, unless he means that enigmatic background of everything psychic, the collective unconscious. White comes to the conclusion that the inscription means nothing less than the soul, the form imprinted on and bound to matter. This again is what happened to the interpreters. They formulated the baffling inscription in accordance with the imprint set upon it by the psyche. White's interpretation is not only original, but profoundly psychological. His deserts are certainly not diminished by his having, so it would seem, arrived at his deeper view only after he received Turius's letter of January 1567. Turius was of the opinion that Aelia and Laelia stood for form and matter. He interprets neither in heaven, nor on earth, nor in water as follows: since the prima materia is nothing, but is conceived solely by the imagination, it cannot be contained in any of these places. It is not an object of the senses, but is conceived solely by the intellect. Therefore we cannot know how this material is constituted. It is evident that Turius's interpretation likewise describes the projection of the psyche and its contents, with the result that his secondary explanations are a petitio principii. As is clear from the title of his book, Allegoria peripatetica de generatione, amicitia et privatione in Aristotelicum enigma Aelia Laelia Crispis, Fortunius Licetus reads the whole philosophy of Aristotle into the monument. He mentions the report that it was sculptured in stone, formerly set in a high position on the walls of St. Peter's, but he does not say that he saw it with his own eyes, for in his day it was no longer in existence, if ever it existed at all. He thinks the inscription contains the summation of a serious philosophical theory about the origin of mundane things, a theory that was scientifico-moralis or ethico-physica. It is the author's intention to combine in a way to be marveled at the attributes of generation, friendship and privation. That is why, he says, the monument is a true treasure house. After reviewing a number of earlier authors who had devoted themselves to the same theme, Licetus mentions the work of Joannes, Casparius Gevatius, who propounded the theory that the inscription described the nature of love. This author cites the comic poet Alexis in Athenaeus. I think that the painters, or to put it more concisely, all who make images of this god, are unacquainted with Eros, for he is neither female nor male. Again, neither god nor man, neither stupid nor yet wise, but rather composed of elements from everywhere, and bearing many qualities under a single form. For his audacity is that of a man, his timidity a woman's, his folly argues madness, his reasoning good sense. His impetuosity is that of an animal, his persistence that of adamant, his love of honor that of a god. Unfortunately, I was unable to get hold of the original treatise of Gevatius, but there is a later author, Cajetanus Felix Verenius, who takes up the Eros theory apparently as his own discovery in his book Pantheon Argentae Elocutionis. He mentions a number of earlier commentators, amongst whom Gevatius is conspicuously absent. As Gevatius is named in the earlier lists, it is scarcely likely that Verenius was unacquainted with him. The suspicion of plagiarism is almost unescapable. Verenius defends his thesis with a good deal of skill, though considering the undeniable paradoxicality of Eros, the task he sets himself is not too difficult. I will mention only one of his arguments concerning the end of the inscription. The inscription ends, he says, with sit et nesit quid qui posuerit, because though the author of this enigmatic inscription knows that he has dedicated it to love, he does not know what love really is, since it is expressed by so many contradictions and riddles. Therefore he knows and does not know to whom he dedicated it. I mention the interpretation of Verenius mainly because it is the forerunner of a theory which was very popular at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century, namely Freud's sexual theory of the unconscious. Verenius even goes so far as to conjecture that Aelia Laelia had a special talent for eroticism, therein anticipating Aldrovandus. He says, Laelia was a whore. Crispis comes from curly-haired because curly-haired people are frailer than others and more prone to the allurements of love. Here he quotes Marshall. Who's that curly-headed fellow who's always running round with your wife, Marianus? Who is that curly-headed fellow? Now it is, as a matter of fact, true that apart from the personal striving for power, or superbia, love in the sense of concupiscentia is the dynamism that most infallibly brings the unconscious to light. And if our author was of the type whose besetting sin is concupiscence, he would never dream that there is any other power in heaven or earth that could be the source of his conflicts and confusions. Accordingly, he will cling to his prejudice as if it were a universal theory, and the more wrong he is, the more fanatically he will be convinced of its truth. But what can love mean to a man with a hunger for power? That is why we always find two main causes of psychic catastrophes. On the one hand, a disappointment in love, and on the other hand, a thwarting of the striving for power. The last interpretation I shall mention is one of the most recent. It dates from 1727, and though its argument is the stupidest, its content is the most significant. How it can be both is explained by the fact that the discovery of significance is not always coupled with intelligence. The spirit bloweth where it listeth. Despite the inadequacy of his equipment, the author C. Schwartz managed to get hold of a brilliant idea whose import, however, entirely escaped him. His view was that Lucius Agatho Precius meant his monument to be understood as the church. Schwartz therefore regards the inscription as being not of classical, but of Christian origin. And in this, as compared with the others, he is undoubtedly right. His arguments, however, are threadbare. To take but one example, he tries to twist DM into Deo Magno. Although his interpretation is not in the least convincing, it nevertheless remains a significant fact that the symbol of the Church in part expresses and in part substitutes for all the secrets of the soul which the humanistic philosophers projected into the Aelia inscription. In order not to repeat myself, I must refer the reader to what I said about the protective function of the Church in psychology and religion. The interpretive projections we have been examining are, with the exception of the last, identical with the psychic contents that dropped out of their dogmatic framework at the time of the Renaissance and the Great Schism, and since then have continued in a state of secularization where they were at the mercy of the immanentist principle of explanation, that is, a naturalistic and personalistic interpretation. The discovery of the collective unconscious did something to alter this situation, for within the limits of psychic experience, the collective unconscious takes the place of the Platonic realm of eternal ideas. Instead of these models giving form to created things, the collective unconscious, through its archetypes, provides the a priori condition for the assignment of meaning. In conclusion, I would like to mention one more document that seems relevant to our context, and that is the anecdote about Meister Eckhart's daughter. A daughter came to the Dominican convent asking for Meister Eckhart. The porter said, "Who shall I tell him?" She answered, "I do not know." "Why do you not know?" he inquired. "Because," she said, "I am neither virgin nor spouse, nor man nor wife, nor widow nor lady, nor lord nor wench nor thrall." The porter went off to Meister Eckhart. "Do come out," he said, "to the strangest wight that ever I heard, and let me come too, and put your head out and say, 'Who is asking for me?'" He did so. She said to him what she had said to the porter. Quoth he, "My child, thou hast a shrewd and ready tongue. I prithee now thy meaning." "An I were a virgin," she replied, "I were in my first innocence. Spouse, I were bearing the eternal word within my soul unceasingly. Were I a man, I should grapple with my faults. Wife should be faithful to my husband. Were I a widow, I should be ever yearning for my one and only love. As lady, I should render fearful homage. As wench, I should be living in meek servitude to God and to all creatures. And as thrall, I should be working hard, doing my best tamely to serve my master. Of all these things, I am no single one, and am the one thing and the other running thither." The master went away and told his pupils, "I have been listening to the most perfect person I ween I ever met." This story is more than 200 years older than the earliest reference to the Aelia inscription, and therefore, if there is any literary influence at all, it could at most be derived from Mathieu de Vendôme, which seems to me just as unlikely as that Meister Eckhart's vision of the naked boy was derived from the classical puer aeternus. In both cases, we are confronted with a significant archetype. In the first, that of the divine maiden, anima. In the second, that of the divine child, the self. As we know, these primordial images can rise up anywhere at any time quite spontaneously, without the least evidence of any external tradition. This story could just as well have been a visionary rumour as a fantasy of Meister Eckhart or of one of his pupils. It is, however, rather too peculiar to have been a real happening. But occasionally reality is quite as archetypal as human fantasy, and sometimes the soul seems to imagine things outside the body, where they fall to playing, as they do in our dreams.